welcome to another episode of Rock's Garage. I'm your host Dan. On today's crash course, we're going to be going over how to align a motor brake and also the installation for our motor brake upgrade kit, which is part number BRK-035, using our motor brake alignment tool, which is part number BRK-036. Now, before we jump into all of that, I want to make sure that you guys have the proper tools that you're going to need for this installation. We're going to need a 10mm socket with a socket wrench, a 10mm wrench, and also we're going to need a Phillips head 3 bit. Also, we're going to need 3 M6 by 1 thread pitch by 60mm nuts and bolts. So the first thing that we're going to go over is realigning the center hole on our motor brake. Now, this realignment is a very simple process. All we're going to have to do is plug it into our cart. Now, I have some power right here, and you have to have at least 24 volts in order to trigger the motor brake. I have 36 volts on this power cord here, and when you plug it in, you'll hear a click, like that, and then you can move the motor brake around in the middle. So, like I said, this power is simulating being plugged into a cart. So if your center hole is not lining up, all you got to do is plug your motor brake into your cart, and then you can adjust the hole to line up onto your cart. Once you have your hole lined up, you can release the power, and that will lock the motor brake back down. As you can see, I can no longer move the motor brake. Now, the next process we're going to go over is the alignment of the mounting holes. I have a couple bolts here that simulate the mounting bolts. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through and line this up. So our first hole, put our bolt through, and it goes right through. I'm going to put the nut back on that bolt to secure it in place. Next, we're going to align the second bolt. As you can see, that'll go through. It just needs a little bit of push to go through. There it goes. And I'll put the nut down on that one as well. Now, we want to tighten these nuts all the way down with some light pressure to keep these two holes lined up. Now, since we know these two holes line up, we're going to put our third bolt through the third hole. Now, as you can see, that bolt is not going through. No matter which way I shake it or anything like that, it won't thread through, none of that. So, we're going to leave these two bolts in, and we're going to remove the two hex head bolts that hold the cover in place. Now that these two bolts are loose, we should be able to get our third bolt through. It might take a little bit of moving things around to get it through, but eventually it will go through. Might have to thread it through just a little bit until it gets through. There we go. Now that third hole is aligned. Put our bolt on it. And now we can tighten these two screws back down. Once those two bolts are back in, we can go ahead and remove our 3 alignment bolts. And now our motor brake is aligned and ready to go on the cart. Next, we're going to go over how to install our heavy-duty motor brake upgrade kit. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a true upgrade kit. This is not a fix for a broken motor brake. So you have to make sure that a normal motor brake will function properly before you install our heavy-duty motor brake. Now let's jump into that install. So before we remove the 2 bolts that hold the cover plate on, we're going to install bolts through the 3 holes. This will help keep the pressure off of those cover plate bolts. Once your 3 bolts are snugged down, we can go ahead and remove the 2 bolts that hold the cover plate on. Now that our 2 screws are removed from the side, we're going to remove the nuts off of the bolts that we put all the way through the motor brake. We're just going to remove the nuts, but keep the bolts in place so that we can keep everything aligned inside the motor brake when we take the cover plate and the friction disc off. Now, I had these bolts laying around my shop that I was able to use to help keep things aligned, but if you need to use the factory bolts that come off your cart, those bolts are M6x1 thread pitch bolts, so if you need to grab nuts for those at your local hardware store, that's what the dimensions are. Now that the nuts are removed from our bolts, we can go ahead and take our cover plate off and remove our friction disc to get ready for the motor brake upgrade. Now we're going to install our upgraded friction disc. Now, the orientation of this, you want to make sure that the rivets with the orange paint on them are facing up. After that, we can go ahead and put our new cover plate on, aligning it with the bolts. Now, I'm also going to be using our alignment tool, our motor brake alignment tool, part number BRK-036, to help align the motor brake inside the housing. This tool is not necessary, but it is definitely very helpful. Now that everything is aligned, we can go ahead and put the nuts back on our 3 alignment bolts. Now we want to make sure we go back through it and tighten down the 3 bolts so that we can take the pressure off of the pressure plate for the mounting screws. Now we can flip it back over, pull our alignment tool out, and reinstall our screws. Now that our 2 screws are in place, we can go ahead and remove our 3 alignment nuts and bolts. So as a recap, in today's episode, we've gone over the alignment for our motor brake and also the installation for part number BRK-035 using part number BRK-036, which is our motor brake alignment tool. Thanks for watching this episode of Rock's Garage, and I'll see you next time.